The crisp August air, thick with the scent of ripening pumpkins and wood smoke, carried the usual murmur of delighted children and the distant rumble of tractor-pulled hayrides across the sprawling expanse of Roloff Farms. It was peak season, the golden hour of the pumpkin patch, when the Oregon sky blazed with hues of amber and crimson, casting long, dramatic shadows across the fields that had made this family synonymous with wholesome reality television. Families had traveled from across the state, clutching their admission tickets and clutching their camera phones, ready to capture a piece of the magic that Matt Roloff had so carefully cultivated for decades. But on this particular afternoon, the magic was about to curdle into something far more sinister. The idyllic scene was merely the proscenium arch of a tragedy, the opening tableau of a drama that would eventually play out not in the rustic barn, but in the sterile, unforgiving environment of a courtroom. For on this day, the carefully constructed universe of the Roloffs was about to be torn apart at the seams, beginning with a scream that would echo far beyond the farm's boundaries and reverberate through the lives of everyone involved. That scream, the one that sent a jolt of electricity through the crowd and brought security personnel running from every corner of the property, was the first domino to fall in a cascade of events that would expose a conspiracy of breathtaking audacity and ultimately end with the clang of handcuffs and the shattering of a family legacy. The immediate aftermath of the incident was a whirlwind of controlled chaos. Caryn Chandler, Matt Roloff's partner and the farm's co-manager, lay crumpled amidst the gourds and straw, her face a mask of agony that seemed almost too perfect, too theatrical for the situation. Bystanders rushed to her aid, their genuine concern a stark contrast to the calculated performance that was unfolding before them. Paramedics were called, their sirens cutting through the pastoral quietude, and Caryn was carefully loaded onto a stretcher, her hand clutching her back as if she had suffered a catastrophic injury. The narrative was set in motion instantly. It was an accident, a terrible, unfortunate accident. Matt Roloff, appearing moments later with a face etched in concern and barely contained fury, wasted no time in pointing fingers. He spoke of unsafe conditions, of uneven ground, of a lawsuit that was surely coming, and in doing so, he subtly but unmistakably laid the blame at the feet of his ex-wife, Amy Roloff. The implication was clear. Amy had created a hostile environment, had neglected the property, and her negligence had resulted in this calamity. It was a masterstroke of deflection, painting the victim of their scheme as the perpetrator, and the public, hungry for drama, began to swallow the narrative whole. The whispers started, the online forums erupted, and the media began to circle. Amy Roloff, who had been trying to move on with her life and build a future with her new husband, Marek, was suddenly thrust back into the spotlight, not as a beloved matriarch, but as a villainous, a bitter ex-wife who had intentionally created a death trap. But it was the second act of this unfolding drama, the one that was supposed to seal the deal and cement Caryn's victimhood, that began to raise eyebrows among the more astute observers. The news broke that the hard drive containing the entire security camera footage from the barn and the surrounding fields had been irretrievably destroyed. Matt Roloff, in a statement that was carefully worded and released to the press, cited a catastrophic power surge as the culprit. This surge, he claimed, had fried the entire system, wiping clean any record of the incident and leaving only the witness accounts to piece together what had happened. It was a fortuitous, almost miraculous coincidence that the one piece of evidence that could definitively prove or disprove the nature of the fall had been rendered useless. For some, it was simply bad luck. For others, it was the first crack in an increasingly implausible story. How could a power surge be so selective, wiping out the hard drive but leaving the rest of the farm's electrical systems seemingly intact? Why was there no backup system in place? No off-site storage for such a critical piece of security footage? These were the questions that percolated in the background, initially dismissed as paranoia or the unfounded speculation of conspiracy theorists. But there was one person who refused to dismiss them. There was one person who, with the quiet, relentless determination of a bloodhound, began to dig deeper into the anomaly. Marek. Marek, often portrayed as a mild-mannered and unassuming figure in the reality TV narrative, possessed a formidable intellect and a meticulous attention to detail that few outsiders could appreciate. He had witnessed firsthand the toll that the divorce, the farm disputes, and the constant public scrutiny had taken on his wife, Amy. He had seen the pain in her eyes, the exhaustion, the quiet desperation of a woman who had given her life to a place and a family, only to be slowly and systematically pushed out. And now, he watched as she was being dragged through the mud again, her reputation shredded by a narrative that he instinctively knew was false. He knew Matt Roloff. He knew the cunning, the strategic mind that operated behind the folksy, grandfatherly persona. He had seen how Matt could manipulate a situation to his advantage, how he could wield his position as the patriarch to get what he wanted. Chris also knew Caryn, and while she presented a warm and friendly demeanor to the cameras, Chris had sensed something else beneath the surface, a steely ambition and a willingness to do whatever it took to secure her future on the farm. Driven by a protective fury that burned with a cold, icy fire, Chris began his own investigation. He didn't shout about it. He didn't post about it on social media. He simply went to work, leveraging his business contacts and his understanding of modern technology to assemble a team of the most elite digital forensic experts money could find. Their mandate was simple: find the truth, no matter where it was hidden. The task that Chris Marek and his team undertook was akin to searching for a needle in a digital haystack that had been intentionally set on fire. The Roloff Farms cloud server, the repository for all the farm's digital data, was a complex labyrinth of corrupted files, deleted logs, and fragmented pathways. The forensic experts described the system as having been deliberately scrambled, not by a random power surge, but by a targeted act of digital sabotage. Someone had attempted to erase the past, to create a digital amnesia that would protect the perpetrators from scrutiny. But the team, armed with cutting-edge software and an inexhaustible patience, began the painstaking process of data recovery. They worked through the night, combing through every fragment, every stray bite of information. They rebuilt corrupted pathways, bypassed deliberately placed digital roadblocks, and used advanced algorithms to reconstruct deleted files from their base components. It was a war of attrition, a battle between the desire to conceal and the determination to reveal, and for weeks, the team operated in the shadows, keeping their progress a tightly guarded secret. They knew that if their work was discovered before it was complete, there would be nothing to stop the perpetrators from destroying the evidence permanently. The pressure was immense, the stakes were astronomical, and the tension in their makeshift operations center was palpable. But then, on a rainy Tuesday night, as the team sifted through a pile of seemingly irrelevant data fragments, they found it. They didn't just find the footage, they found everything. They found the complete, unedited, high-definition video file of the pumpkin patch incident, and in doing so, they had stumbled upon a gold mine of incriminating data that would blow the entire case wide open. The moment of revelation came when the recovery team reconstructed the file and played the footage for the first time. What they saw left them stunned. The footage, captured from a high-angle camera mounted on the barn, offered a panoramic view of the entire pumpkin patch. It was a crystal-clear, high-definition recording that captured every detail with devastating precision. And what it depicted was a scene that was diametrically opposed to the narrative that Matt and Caryn had so carefully constructed. The tape showed Caryn Chandler walking through the pumpkin patch, her gait steady and confident. There was no trip hazard, no uneven ground, no obstacle in her path. Instead, the footage showed a deliberate, calculated act of deception. Caryn paused, glancing around the field to make sure she had the attention of the security personnel and the nearby bystanders. With a fluid, practiced motion, she lowered herself to the ground, her knees bending gently as she nestled herself among the pumpkins. She then rolled onto her side, arched her back, and let out a cry that was, by all accounts, a masterclass in simulated pain. There was no sudden impact, no twisting of an ankle, no stumble. It was a performance, pure and simple, a piece of amateur theater designed to elicit sympathy and, more importantly, to create a legal liability that would force Amy Roloff into a corner. The footage didn't just prove that Caryn had lied, it proved that the entire incident was a premeditated fraud. The team, their suspicions confirmed, began the next phase of their investigation, combing through the recovered data for any other hidden treasures. And they were not disappointed. Buried deep within the recovered cloud data, alongside the unedited video footage, the forensic team unearthed a cache of text messages that would expose the rot at the very heart of the conspiracy. These were not casual, everyday exchanges. They were the strategic communications of two people who were actively plotting to destroy another human being. The messages between Matt Roloff and Caryn Chandler, stretching back weeks before the fall, laid bare their intentions with a chilling clarity. They discussed the need to take Amy down, to make her look unstable, to use the farm against her. They strategized about how to leverage the upcoming incident, the fall that they had already planned, to paint Amy as a reckless and negligent owner who had endangered people. Matt, in one particularly damning message, wrote about how the lawsuit would be the perfect tool to force Amy to sell her share of the farm, cutting her out of the business entirely. Caryn, replying, suggested that they leak the story to the tabloids to maximize the public relations damage. The conversation was not just about money. It was about humiliation, about revenge, about the petty satisfaction of watching someone suffer. They spoke of Amy in the most derogatory terms, dismissing her contributions to the farm and her family, and treating her as an obstacle to be removed rather than a partner to be respected. The texts were a window into a dark and calculating psyche, revealing a ruthless ambition that was willing to sacrifice truth, integrity, and family unity to achieve its goals. Marek, his heart heavy but his resolve hardened, knew that he had to submit this evidence to the court. The game was up. The courtroom, a cavernous space of polished wood and somber lighting, was packed to the rafters on the day of the hearing. Journalists from every major news outlet jostled for position, their cameras poised to capture the moment of reckoning. Fans of the show, some wearing Roloff Farms merchandise, sat in the gallery, their faces a mixture of curiosity and nervous anticipation. The atmosphere was electric, charged with the unspoken knowledge that this was not going to be a typical civil hearing. The defense team, led by a high-profile attorney known for his aggressive tactics, appeared confident, their expensive suits and polished shoes a testament to the wealth behind their client. The prosecution, led by a steely-eyed district attorney who had made a name for himself prosecuting white-collar fraud, sat quietly at their table, their files meticulously organized and their faces devoid of emotion. And then, there was Matt Roloff, his face pale and his expression one of strained composure, sitting directly behind Caryn Chandler, who was dressed in a somber gray outfit that was meant to convey modesty and innocence. The facade was intact, but it was about to be shattered. The prosecution's opening statement was a bombshell. They announced that they had obtained new evidence that had been previously thought lost, and they requested a recess to present it to the judge in private, away from the jury. The defense objected, their objections were overruled, and the judge, his curiosity piqued, agreed to review the material in his chambers. The pause was agonizing, stretching for what felt like an eternity, but when the judge returned to the bench, his demeanor had undergone a seismic shift. His face was hard, his eyes cold, and his voice carried a tone of barely suppressed outrage. He announced that the trial would proceed, and the video footage would be played in open court. The collective intake of breath was audible. And then, the projector hummed to life, and the unedited footage filled the massive courtroom screen. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the whir of the projector and the faint sound of someone nervously tapping their foot. The footage played, and as the seconds ticked by, the transformation in the room was palpable. Caryn Chandler, who had maintained a stoic expression throughout the morning, began to visibly tremble. Her face flushed, her eyes darted nervously from side to side, and she looked at Matt with a desperation that was painful to witness. The judge, however, was focused entirely on the screen. He watched as Caryn walked through the patch. He watched as she paused. He watched as she lowered herself to the ground in that deliberate, theatrical gesture. His face remained impassive, but his knuckles, gripping the edge of the bench, were white. When the footage ended, the courtroom erupted in a frenzy of whispers and gasps. The media scrambled to send out breaking news alerts. The defense attorney rose to his feet, his face ashen, and attempted to argue that the footage was misleading, that it didn't capture the full context of the situation. The judge cut him off mid-sentence. He asked if the defense had any other witnesses to call. The attorney, stammering, said that they did. The judge then announced that the court would take a brief recess to review a second piece of evidence that had been submitted by the prosecution. The mood in the room was one of barely contained chaos. The defense was reeling, their carefully constructed narrative lying in ruins on the courtroom floor. When the court reconvened, the judge didn't mince words. He had reviewed the text messages, the shocking correspondence that had been recovered from the cloud server, and he was deeply disturbed by what he had read. The judge described the messages as malevolent, deliberately deceptive, and a conspiracy to commit fraud. He read excerpts aloud, his voice heavy with disgust. The words hung in the air, condemning Matt and Caryn in their own voices. The defense, realizing that their clients were cornered, attempted to mount a desperate rearguard action, arguing that the messages were taken out of context and that they were merely venting frustrations. The prosecution, however, systematically dismantled this defense, pointing out the specific, unambiguous language that outlined a plan to commit fraud and to manufacture a lawsuit. The state's attorney argued that this was not just a case of a personal injury claim gone wrong. This was a case of malicious prosecution, a deliberate attempt to exploit the justice system for financial gain and personal revenge. He presented the evidence as a clear pattern of behavior, from the staged fall to the destruction of evidence to the coordinated media campaign designed to smear Amy Roloff's name. The accumulation of evidence was overwhelming. The sheer depth of the deception, the intricate web of lies, and the calculated malice behind it all left even the most seasoned legal observers in shock. The roles had been completely reversed. Caryn Chandler was no longer the victim. She was the aggressor. Matt Roloff was no longer the protective partner. He was the co-conspirator. And Amy Roloff, who had been vilified in the press, was now seen as the innocent party, a woman who had been unjustly attacked by those she had once trusted. The final act of this legal tragedy was swift and brutal. The judge, having heard all the evidence and reviewed the overwhelming proof of fraud, delivered his verdict without hesitation. He found Caryn Chandler guilty on multiple counts, filing a false police report, perjury, and malicious prosecution. The judge stated that the evidence was so clear, so unequivocal, that a not guilty verdict would be a miscarriage of justice. He then turned his attention to the matter of sentencing. He noted that this was not a crime of passion or a momentary lapse in judgment. It was a premeditated, carefully orchestrated scheme that spanned weeks and involved the active participation of multiple individuals. He stated that such a calculated effort to subvert the legal system and to destroy another person's reputation could not be allowed to go unpunished. The judge's voice was measured, but his words carried the weight of absolute authority. He sentenced Caryn Chandler to a period of incarceration, a sentence that sent a shockwave through the courtroom. The sound of the gavel echoed like a death knell. Caryn, who had been sitting in a state of paralyzed shock, began to tremble violently as the bailiff approached the defense table. Her carefully maintained composure finally shattered. The tears, the sobs, the pleas for mercy, they were all real now, but it was far too late. As the bailiff produced the handcuffs and fastened them around her wrists, there was a collective gasp from the gallery. The cameras zoomed in, capturing every detail of the moment. The glint of the metal, the look of abject despair on her face, the silent, stoic figure of Matt Roloff sitting frozen in his seat, unable to process what was happening. Caryn Chandler, the woman who had tried to manipulate the world, was being led away in handcuffs, her days of plotting and scheming replaced by the harsh reality of a jail cell. The aftermath of the verdict was a whirlwind of public vindication and legal repercussions. Amy Roloff, who had been forced to endure months of slander and speculation, finally saw her name cleared in the most definitive way possible. In a statement released shortly after the sentencing, she expressed her profound relief and her gratitude to Marek, whose relentless pursuit of the truth had saved her from an unjust fate. She spoke of the pain of being betrayed by people she had once considered family, the emotional and financial toll of the legal battle, and the hope that justice, however delayed, had finally been served. The vindication wasn't just about winning the lawsuit. It was about reclaiming her narrative. For years, she had been portrayed as the bitter ex-wife, the obstacle to the farm's progress, the source of unnecessary drama. Now, the world could see the truth. She was the victim of a conspiracy, a woman who had been targeted by those who wanted her out of the picture at any cost. Her public image, which had been carefully tarnished, was now rehabilitated. She was no longer the villain of the story. She was the hero, the resilient survivor who had weathered the storm and emerged stronger on the other side. She pledged to continue her work in the community and to focus on her family, leaving the drama of the farm behind her. But the legal repercussions were only just beginning. The civil lawsuit filed by Amy Roloff against Matt and Caryn for malicious prosecution was now on a fast track. The evidence of their conspiracy was already a matter of public record, and the damages were expected to be astronomical. The lawsuit sought not only compensation for the legal fees and the emotional distress, but also for the lost income and the damage to her brand that had resulted from the false allegations. The claim, which covered the costs of her legal defense, the lost opportunities, and the public humiliation, could easily reach into the millions of dollars. And the primary asset that was on the line was none other than the farm itself, the very land that Matt had fought so hard to control, the legacy he had wanted to preserve for his children, the prize that had driven him to participate in the conspiracy against his ex-wife. The bitter irony was not lost on the public. In their desperate attempt to consolidate power and eliminate Amy from the picture, Matt and Caryn had jeopardized the very thing they were trying to protect. The financial strain was already beginning to show. The costs of the legal defense, the potential settlements, and the loss of public trust were taking a toll on the farm's operations. The pumpkin patch, once a symbol of family unity, was now a testament to the destructive power of greed and ambition. This story, as it unfolds, is a classic tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. It is a tale of ambition, betrayal, and the ultimate irony of self-destruction. Matt Roloff, the patriarch who had built an empire on the values of family and hard work, was now exposed as the architect of a failed cover-up, a man willing to lie to the police and manipulate the legal system to get what he wanted. Caryn Chandler, who had entered the scene as a trusted manager and a romantic partner, was now a convicted felon, her reputation in tatters and her future uncertain. And Amy Roloff, who had been cast as the obstacle, the bitter ex-wife, had emerged as the moral victor, her spirit unbroken and her integrity vindicated. The farm, that iconic symbol of the Roloff family's legacy, now stands as a monument to the consequences of unchecked ambition.